Oscar Velasco Schmitz of the Dockside Co-op Dispensary talks about the derivation of his name. Immigration from Mexico does come up. Welcome to Cannabis Economy. I'm your host, Seth Adler. Talk to Oscar about what he's doing in cannabis. He has been in it for quite a while. He started in 2011, so historical cannabis information by way of Oscar Velasco Schmitz. Happy to be on the Sexpot Comedy Co-op and the Cannabis Radio Network. Enjoy Oscar Velasco Schmitz. So we've got Oscar Velasco Schmitz from Dockside Co-op. Oscar, thank you so much for some time here.
Seth, thank you for your time.
So first things first, Oscar Velasco Schmitz, please share with us the various heritages, I'm guessing, that are involved there.
Well, it's pretty straightforward, even though the name may be a little bit misleading. My heritage is Mexican, and as it turns out, it's a Jewish Mexican, which I have come to find out only about 10 years ago that that's the case. My father's last name was actually Levi, but when we immigrated to the U.S., he was afraid that I'd be persecuted, and so he redacted that name on my official birth certificate, and it wasn't until I tried to renew my passport, my Mexican passport, with the Mexican consul here in Seattle that I learned that, in fact, I had a Jewish ancestry.
Wow. From
my Mexican heritage. And the Schmitz comes from an amalgamation of my and my wife's last names. She is a German national, and her last name is Schmitz, and we decided that it would be good to put our names together as far as our family name. And so that's where that comes from. It's a bit misleading, but so it's a Mexican and German amalgamation of the last name.
Okay, and then wait. So where did I'm not seeing Levi anywhere. I obviously redacted the name. Where did Velasco come in?
Velasco was my father's was another name that was in my father's family that was also in my birth certificate. But that's the one that he thought would be least controversial. So that's the one that he left on.
Got it. And then what is your part of the Schmitz last name?
It's my wife's. That's we've when we got married.
Oh, Velasco Schmitz, and then you've got the hyphen. Okay, great. Now I get it. All right.
There you
Fantastic.
Are. Yeah.
This is very progressive of you. This is very 21st century of you.
Oh, sure. Well, we are in the 21st century, as it turns out.
It's true. Every day, and it'll be a while.
Yeah,
it'll be a while. We'll be here for a little bit.
Yeah.
So you did mention you're in Seattle, Dockside Co-op. Just to kind of set the stage for us, how would you share with us what you're doing over there?
That's a really good question. You mentioned Dockside Co-op, and Dockside Co-op was founded between myself and two other partners in 2011, and we saw the market for medical cannabis begin to emerge under very tentative policy and no regulation within the state of Washington, and we decided that what was really needed within the market was a type of a normalization within the entire supply chain, and we decided to launch Dockside Co-op to truly target the medical cannabis patients, and actually to target a more mature medical cannabis patient, which is not to say that younger or more immature patients were not well deserved. In fact, we have a number of much younger patients, but we decided to really target the demographic that was a little bit older, that were really seeking to alleviate a lot of their conditions through medical cannabis with the Dockside Co-op paradigm. And for lack of better words, we targeted more the NPR listener, if you would. And that was 11 years. That was in 2011. So now, almost 5 years ago. Since that time, the policy for medical cannabis has been in place, and it won't be until this coming July that medical cannabis will actually begin to be regulated by the state of Washington. So between when we launched Dockside Co-op and now when the medical market will be regulated in Washington State, we also have launched 2 recreational shops that are the sister stores of Dockside Co-op, and they are both run under the name Dockside Cannabis.
Interesting. Okay. So getting your hands dirty in I-502. How about that, right?
I would say they're not that dirty, as it turns out. I think we're gaining quite a bit of experience. I think we had quite a bit of experience learning what dealing in a cannabis market was with the medical shop, and now just basically honing the retail paradigm in recreation, and also helping to transition medical cannabis under policy to medical cannabis under regulation in Washington.
Yeah, and we've spoken with a number of folks, in Washington State. Obviously, you guys have had a time of it in terms of the legislation and the regulations, and it does feel like we are moving in the right direction. We used to say kind of building the plane while flying it. It does sound like it's a different. It's a different place now. We've got I-502 up and running. Medical is on its way. Everybody is kind of faced in the right direction, eyes forward. Is that a fair way to describe what's happening if we're in January 2016? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think, folks, a lot of questions that I get asked are, is the federal government going to turn its back on cannabis policy and its current cannabis policy? And while there is a chance, if we have, God forbid, we have a Donald Trump or anybody else like that in office in 2016, barring something like that, I don't see cannabis in general turning back. I think the narratives now, there's plenty of buy-in from policymakers. They finally have caught up to what society is doing, and it's a completely normal behavior that we're engaging in. It's one of commerce. It's one of use of a good that exists in commerce, and now it's our job to shepherd it into a regulated paradigm.
Yeah, and so you've got the 2+1. Is that it? Did I hear that right? As far as dispensaries?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we have 2 recreational stores and a medical shop as well in Seattle.
If you're going after the NPR listener, is that at all 3 shops, or can you kind of?
No, I think that's a great question, and just to disambiguate that, I think when we first launched Dockside Co-op, there was a lot of noise. There was a lot of noise within the market, and we really wanted to cut through the noise and reach out to a customer segment that was really interested in the science of cannabis, what the avant-garde research was, really looking at the palliative aspects of cannabis and whatever research there was available at the time, instead of maybe providing a medical-like experience for folks that really just wanted to score a really nice bag of ganja in a nice shop, which is perfectly fine.
Sure.
And again, there are no value judgments that we make about that. I think, and this is the juxtaposition that we have with this NPR listener within the medical shop. For the recreational shop, I think the tagline that we're using is marijuana for everyone. Mm-hmm. And while we do still have the standard of quality that we do at Dockside Co-op in the recreational shops, we really want to open it up to all of the cannabis users out there. And it's more of a mass market appeal that we need to abide by, because there are no at this point there are no constraints other than the age requirement of 21 years.
Right. Exactly. Okay, so that gives us a sense of what you're doing today. Like I said, January 2016. But you said 2011 is when you got started. Let's go kind of all the way back. You mentioned your dad emigrated from Mexico. You were born. Were you born in Washington State, or where were you born?
No, I was born in Mexico City.
Oh, you were? Oh, okay.
Yes.
And I understand as a New Yorker that Mexico City, if I think that there's crazy driving in New York, I haven't seen anything.
There is not that crazy a driving in New York, having been to New York, and in comparing it to other cities in the world. It's relatively mild. So I mean, Mexico City is a very cosmopolitan metropolis. I think it and Tokyo go back and forth as far as population density being the most populous cities in the world, and I mean, it's a world-class city, just like New York is, or Paris.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. And so how long were you there?
Very short time in Mexico City. I came as a very, very young child, but we have plenty of family still there, and so we are very fortunate to be able to visit.
Excellent. And where did you move to when you were a kid?
California. I went from the metropolis of Mexico City to a very small farming community in the San Joaquin Valley of California. So, from the city to the farm. And that really provided a very good understanding of what agricultural commodities are like. And so that has certainly helped to inform my understanding of cannabis as a good in a goods market and as a commodity as well.
I feel like, it bat me away if this is not something that you want to talk about, but it's something that's in the news because we are now officially in a presidential election year. And, immigration from Mexico, you mentioned paperwork, so it does sound like you did it the traditional way. Take us through that, what your feelings are about the conversation that, that's in the ether.
That's interesting. This definitely diverges from the cannabis conversation, but I'm happy to talk about it.
Good.
We have a relatively free and unobstructed movement of goods and free and unobstructed movement of capital throughout a global marketplace. And so the labor market also happens to be one of the major markets in general in economics. Mm-hmm. And so I don't see an issue of moving labor markets across borders. Right. If there is a demand for labor, then let's let it's like anything else, right? I mean, there's going to be a parallel market for plywood, for God's sakes. Why can't there be a parallel market for anything else?
Right.
You're putting me in a very interesting position here because, in theory, being in the cannabis industry, we are involved in an industrial act of civil disobedience.
Indeed.
And I would say folks that are moving across borders, either with paperwork or with documents or without documents, as you see with the refugee crisis from Syria, mm-hmm. moving into Europe, you have a flow of human beings, and let's not forget that they're humans.
Right.
Being human is not an illegal act in and of itself right. at all, and these borders are man-made, and so if we want to really take it back to early history, whose land is whose?
Indeed.
You could talk about appropriation of things, and appropriation of land is a big one. And so I would say I'm pretty open to immigration of all sorts. I mean, it's a big country. So.
And the reason I wanted to, and thank you for answering the question, the reason I wanted to kind of preface my next question with your thoughts was, why did your dad feel and actually feel like he should come and actually come? What was the conversation in the family, understanding you were a little kid at the time?
Yeah, no, not at all. I think I have a good understanding of it. I think it's a very old story. I think it's not just unique to my family, but it's a story of opportunity, and I think it's the foundational story of the United States of America from its inception to, or at least conventional inception of pilgrims escaping what was a more confined religious practice in Europe, to be able to appropriate to expand into new territory. And so opportunity, I would say, is the fundamental course.
If that okay, fair enough. What have you learned since and specifically from your dad, who you mentioned was the real guy, kind of decision maker there? Maybe I'm speaking out of turn. But what did you learn from your dad and maybe even your mom? From being a little kid, first in Mexico City and then in California.
What did I learn? It's I'll go into it's a bit of a personal history, which I won't go into. But the lessons are, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of uncharted territory, which is, I think it's a very old immigrant story. I think all of us that are not Native Americans in what is now conventional United States. All have a history of migration to uncharted territory and the unknown, and I think it translates very well into what we're transitioning now within the cannabis space. It's uncharted territory, but again, these are very old stories. These are things that we shouldn't be afraid of. This is again, opportunity to change paradigm, opportunity to create, to build where there was nothing before, or where there was I shouldn't say where there was nothing before. I think it does a disservice to an economy that was a cannabis economy before there were I-502s or I-64s
sure.
or whatever. This is essentially commerce.
Or AB 266s, because
exactly.
You're talking about California.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So there are big parallels. And the lesson learned is don't be afraid of things you don't know, because you'll learn them. It's okay.
That's it. Well, speaking of that, did you go to school? Did you experience higher learning?
I did go to school. I constantly experience higher learning. I was fortunate enough to attend University of California at Santa Cruz.
Okay.
And that also really helped to inform my understanding and attitudes of cannabis. Having been raised in very rural California, which is a very conservative part of California, the DARE programs, which were in place during my school time, were definitely indoctrinated in us. Drugs are bad. If you don't believe me, ask your mom, kind of a thing.
Right.
And then going to school in Santa Cruz really helped to inform me that, hey, there are these Jewish hippie kids from West LA that are smoking weed and aren't getting arrested. Well, what's up with that? It's perfectly fine. And they tend to carry really dank nugs, and they were very generous with their ganja. And I realized, hey, this is perfectly fine. In fact, there's nothing really to fear. In fact, hey, let's go for a hike. And so that definitely informed my education. But in more formal training, I had formal training in linguistics when I was there, which then led to my moving to Seattle. As it turned out, the linguistics department at UC Santa Cruz I had no idea when I went there. I went there to study math and then wound up studying linguistics. The linguistics department is one of the top linguistics departments in the world. And somebody from the natural language group at Microsoft had a need for syntacticians and linguistics, for syntacticians, and specifically for syntacticians who had native language of Spanish. And so they called my department. They found a paper that I'd written, and they called my department and they said, hey, we'd like to get a hold of this guy, Oscar. Is he available? And I interviewed, I kid you not, my first interview for Microsoft was at a taqueria off of Highway 1 in California. And 2 weeks later, I was living in Seattle working on natural language technology. So that's what brought me here to Seattle.
Yes, I mean, that's a pretty good way to get to Seattle, is to work with Microsoft. Forgive me for not being a tech guy. What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, sure. So if you've ever used Word, and you've seen the red and green squiggles, the underlying technology for those is a natural language parsing system, which was developed by a wonderful set of colleagues of mine in the natural language group. in Microsoft. It started as a research project with MSR, Microsoft Research, and then it was turned into a product group by a developer by the name of David Weiss, amongst other folks. Brilliant dude, amongst other amazingly brilliant guys and women in our group. And the technology is now used in Bing, in SQL Server. It's used throughout all of the Office products. I'm sure there are a number of other internal clients that use the engine.
Yeah.
And so basically that's what it is. You basically are using a parsing engine to be able to solve real world problems like identifying named entities, which are phone numbers, email addresses, URLs, names, addresses, so on and so forth. And also to correct people's spelling and to correct people's grammar.
So am I hearing you right that you personally affected change in the red and green squiggles in Microsoft Word and other Microsoft products?
Yes, sir.
My goodness. I mean, this industry, it's amazing. Because, we recently spoke to the drummer for Blues Traveler and Melissa Etheridge, well-known musician.
Yeah.
We also have spoken to someone that was Top Gun, literally Top Gun, Shane Terry. We've spoken with Horatio Delbert, who worked on the Harry Potter movies.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It takes all kinds.
It's amazing.
No, it takes all kinds. It's a very diverse group of folks that are undertaking, the inculcation of cannabis into a mainstream commercial paradigm.
So how do we go from Microsoft to cannabis? How does that?
Oh God, yeah. Well, I mean, between you, myself, and your listeners, there are a number of tokers in the tech industry, don't be surprised that most of the code is, written on some substance or another. And really, I mean, this goes to speak to, what some of the I would say benefits of cannabis are. Not for you younger listeners, or at least listen to your folks out there.
Right.
Follow your laws. The ability to conceptualize abstraction becomes much more salient under cannabis, under usage of cannabis, and so I think I'm not surprised, right? There are a number of different tech folks that. I think there's this microdosing phenomena that's happening in Silicon Valley now, and I think people are using psychedelics in their microdosing. It's just anecdotal, but
no, LSD. Yeah. I mean, that hit the newswire,
sure.
Certainly, which is remarkable. But as far as your history at Microsoft, how long were you there, and when did you leave, and why?
Oh God, I started in 2000 and then I left in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was at Microsoft, I had a real interest in economics. And this I'll give you a little bit more background. My father was more family history. My stepfather, my biological mom and dad separated when I was young, but my stepfather was very involved in the UFW, the United Farm Workers Movement. And so I was always very privy to the power of organization within communities to affect change. And while I was at Microsoft, I studied economics with a couple of colleagues there, and really became keen on the notion of business and economics in general. And together with another colleague, we decided, let's. I think we must have been stoned one night and reading philosophy, but we started riffing on Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, and we started riffing our own ideas, and we thought, why don't we open up our own business, to affect change in society. And so we launched a place that is still in existence on Capitol Hill called The Lookout, and it's a wonderful bar that has it's called The Lookout. Mind you, I have background in linguistics, so I like naming things. And The Lookout has a marvelous view of the Space Needle, Lake Union, the Olympic Mountain Range, downtown. and it sits on the western skirt of a neighborhood called Capitol Hill in Seattle. You should go and check it out if you get the chance. And so that's what we cut our teeth in business. And as it turns out, it's a very, very tough business to run a restaurant. And so we really learned what it was to conduct business doing that.
Right.
And I followed cannabis. I was always following cannabis politics, and I had a number of colleagues at Microsoft that were saying, "You're crazy. Cannabis isn't going to get legalized anytime soon." I'd say, it's moving that way. And I just kept track of what was happening, and I stayed involved and informed, and I've always been really civically engaged, and I think at some point I wrote I wrote a white paper just to present to some policymakers here in the city regarding what a supply chain would look like given the current medical cannabis statutes. And I won't mention who the policymaker was, but that person said, you probably want to present it to the guy that prosecutes felonies.
Right.
Because that's what you're proposing.
Right.
And sure enough, I asked the question in a public forum to the county prosecutor, and the question, the statute at the time was one provider at a time, and the folks in Washington who are your listeners will know what that means. And I asked the question to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor said, the answer was very telling. He said, every morning I wake up and I go to a shop and I order a drug, and I hand the young lady my money and she hands me my coffee, and that transaction is done one customer at a time.
Right.
And so, in essence, that was the unofficial green light. There was a lot of back channeling as well that was done, but in a public forum, that was the billboard that said, "Hey, this is a legitimate thing that this prosecutor is of the attitude that he will not prosecute cannabis, medical cannabis commerce in this very gray area." And the law has subsequently changed. It's no longer one provider at a time. We're now, at least until July of this year, we're operating under a collective garden model.
Right.
And this is the result of Senate Bill 5073, which was passed by both houses of the legislature here in Washington State, which was an amazing feat, and that happened in 2011. Unfortunately, the governor at the time wrote a letter to the Department of Justice saying, "Hey, by the way, my legislature has just passed a comprehensive regulatory scheme for medical cannabis within the state. What do you think?"
Right.
And, it's kind of like asking, "Hey, Mom,
right.
Can I stay after curfew?" Mom's going to say no.
No.
And that's what the DOJ did. And so the governor line item vetoed the legislation, which left ambiguous language and permissive language for collective gardens. We then interpreted that language and introduced the concept of collective garden access points, because you can't have again, this is borrowing from software background. We interpreted a collective garden as an array, as a data structure in which 10 members of that collective garden had a dynamic relationship to that collective garden. And in order to be able to access their collective garden, they needed an access point. And so the retail shops, then people just kind of went with that nomenclature, and they were called access points. The dispensaries were here in Washington.
Yeah.
Not by any official documentation from the state, but this became the popular term.
As we get further and further into this conversation, you're beginning to sound a little bit like your fellow board member on CCSC, John Davis. But I'm sure you know that.
I hope not. Just kidding. No,
of course.
I'm flattered. I'm sure. No, John does a lot of great work with policy And this really is what it takes. It takes outspoken individuals who are not afraid to make claims and to venture into the unknown.
Yeah.
And to present themselves, to basically give a face to the industry. So
those early days at Dockside, while things were literally getting written, what was it like on the ground right at the beginning?
It was very unknown. It felt, I don't want to get inappropriate with any of the correlations, but it felt like we were out after curfew. I'll keep it family friendly. We were out after curfew, and surprisingly, not surprisingly, I think I was very assured by the open-mindedness of the city of Seattle, including the Seattle Police Department. We really took the tack of engaging with not only the policymakers but the enforcers of the law here in Seattle. We went to the cops and we said, hey, you guys, we're going to open a shop. It's going to be here. We're involving ourselves with our chambers of commerce and the Rotary and with every single organization that other businesses involve themselves with. To create community, and they were very supportive. In fact, we still our beat cop, our local community officer, still comes by the shop and knocks on the door and says, "Hey, is anybody hassling you guys? You guys doing okay?" And just checking in and saying hello. Right. And maybe that's just good police work that they're doing. In fact, it is good police work that they're doing. I think there's a culture here. The police department here is not without its controversy. Mm-hmm. But one of the initiatives that they've undertaken is community policing, and I think there are some factions of SPD that does take that to heart, and that has been a great benefit to normalizing cannabis within our city. And not to mention a number of different council members who were very open. I remember, and the mayor as well at the time. I remember asking the then candidate for mayor. I said, "What are your attitudes about cannabis?" And his response was, "If every politician who'd ever smoked weed in his or her life admitted to it, we'd live in a much different society." And coming from a candidate for mayoral office in one of America's larger cities, that was a big bell that went off in my head, saying, attitudes are shifting.
Well, absolutely. And the electorate is completely there. We find out in every election, whoever wins, in the state, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican at the top of the ticket, cannabis gets more votes than those politicians. And obviously, we're getting closer and closer to many more states coming online, hopefully, at year's end. As I said, this election year, many ballot measures in effect. And just saw a comment from the governor of Vermont today, who wants to move forward on legislation regarding recreational cannabis in Vermont. So we're in a very different place than we were in 2011, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think Vermont has had medical cannabis on its books for a number of years now. But you're talking about a recreational situation in Vermont?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of the great state of Vermont.
Yeah. Well, it was a post from DPA regarding comments that the governor of Vermont made in his State of the State address.
Great.
I tend to take the DPA on good authority.
That's
right.
That's wonderful. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Drug Policy Alliance has been doing good work.
Yeah. So, as far as 2016, you've given us a fair amount of your history and, how it has worked in Washington, how it is working in Washington, how it's about to work in Washington starting July 1st. What do you see besides that switch turning on there in Washington?
I'll give you two tracks. So regarding the medical cannabis right now is very much alive in in Washington State, again, through the collective garden model that exists, and soon to be regulated by the Liquor and Cannabis Board starting in July. So what you'll see is a transition of loosely regulated and municipally, local jurisdictionally regulated medical cannabis to a statewide system. Mm-hmm. And there are some demerits to it. I think there's a fear of privacy as the new system for medical cannabis in Washington State requires a registry to be in place for a patient to be able to be exempt from the excise tax, or I'm sorry, from the cannabis tax. It's unfortunate that patients would have to give up information to get that and be in a database that, we can talk about data privacy in America and globally, maybe in a different podcast. But certainly that's coming online in July. The Department of Health is responsible for putting that database together. And again, like I said, the Liquor Cannabis Board is going to be regulating the actual commerce of it. As far as the recreational market is concerned, it continues to grow. There's a parallel market which has existed for years, which is currently serving. I couldn't tell you. I'm not a sociologist or a statistician to be able to give you figures, mm-hmm. but I'm sure there are facts and figures out there to figure out what portion of the market is being served right now by the I-502 system in Washington. I think that percentage will continue to be transported over to the regulated system. So the market will continue to grow. More shops are getting, on the retail end of things, more shops are getting licensed. The producers, while they are not issuing more licenses for production or processing, there are producers that will probably expand their canopy and continue to provide more state-regulated cannabis throughout the year. Mm-hmm. So it will continue to grow. We have our mandates from the Department of Justice and the Department of Treasury to keep this program going. I think so long as we continue to keep in mind that it is a commodity, it is a good in a goods market that consumers have a demand for, you're going to see this sea change across the country, not only here in Washington State. Yeah,
it is amazing. The first dispensary in New York City opened today.
That's right. I read about that. How are you seeing that there? I'm sorry to be the questioner, but this is your show. But I'm curious to know what do you see?
Well, in the northeastern states, and I'm not even counting New England, because in Vermont they have an established cannabis culture. New York, New Jersey, kind of Connecticut, Pennsylvania, the cannabis economies are very much underground and have been forever. Yeah. We do not have 3 generations of cultivators. Like California does. Yeah. We do not have, many years like Oregon or Washington does, or even Alaska for that matter. Yeah. So everything is kind of brand new. Interesting. So it's very muted. It's almost like a sense of, I can't believe this is happening. Because there is no established cannabis culture,
Right. And this is, just to tie it back to your question on migration, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw migration patterns of the cannabis labor market moving to states where it's becoming normalized as well. So you'll continue to see migration, both I think all legal. Yeah. within the borders.
Well, that's, we do not have, install of folks that know how to do cannabis in the Northeast. It is not here. It is certainly in California and Washington and Oregon, and obviously very much so now in Colorado.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but so folks are going to have to come over, and we're going to absolutely look to, the SSDP. Thanks, Betty Aldworth, and Oaksterdam University. Thanks, Dale Sky Jones.
Absolutely, I was just going to say that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Oaksterdam is. Are they opening up in New York?
No. I'm just saying we're going to be looking to, to the graduates of that university and the SSDP. We're going to need those folks up here because there is not the install base,
Yeah, absolutely. And with that in mind, you'll also need to, speaking of movement of things, you'll also need to import genetics, which do not exist in the Northeast.
Indeed, and my sense is that there is some here, and we're absolutely going to need much more. That's exactly right. All right. Well, there we are from coast to coast. We kind of covered a little bit of everything. I guess I want to ask you these three final questions that we traditionally ask. I'll lay them out for you, and then then I'll ask you them one at a time. What has most surprised you in cannabis? That's the first question. What has most surprised you in life? And then on the soundtrack of Oscar Velasco Schmitz's life, on the soundtrack of your life, what is one track, one song that's got to be there? So, you've been in the cannabis space for a while. You are a veteran. What has most surprised you in cannabis?
Oh, what has most surprised me in cannabis? I read Voltaire, so I'm not surprised by too much.
Right.
Or in life. What is surprising? What has surprised me is how receptive what typically conservative factions or conservative communities across the country, how they've accepted cannabis. You look at the state of Utah, and that has legislation now on its books for medical cannabis. Mind you, it's very limited to a CBD cannabinoid. Cannabis, but nonetheless, so that has surprised me, and quite pleasantly so. Within life, what has surprised me, I try to maintain a pretty even keel. I'm not too surprised by too many. Well, I guess what continues to surprise me, I think a friend said it best, is willful ignorance. On a number of different levels, just a willful ignorance, and then a soundtrack.
From who? From folks you interact with? From yourself? Who do you mean?
No. Well, I'm fallible just like you. I have to poop just like Seth does, and just like most of your listeners do.
Right.
Willful ignorance across the board.
Right.
Just on a number of different things, whether it's race relations or whether it's falling into the trappings of contemporary capitalism, which sometimes needs to be saved from itself, to a number of things. Right, we still promulgate wars across our globe, right, and so that sense of willful ignorance of not understanding the history of human consciousness or the self. And a lot of it goes back to, again, just to riff on a couple of things, is Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. If you don't have all of the basic needs, how will you ever be able to have a moment of reflective and critical thought? So I'm surprised / not surprised. I understand I see the symptoms, and I understand, or at least I feel like I have an understanding of the causes. So,
yeah.
And then the soundtrack. God, I listen to all kinds of stuff. So, what's a good one, man? What's a good one out there? I was recently listening to Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon.
Well, sure.
So I was making dinner last night for my family. So, I'd say any track off of there.
Well, sure. I mean, you've basically I think is it still the best-selling album of all time?
Oh God, I don't know.
Who knows these things? So. What's an album anyway, right?
Yeah, what's an album now? What's an album now? I don't know. Leonard Cohen. Have you heard the recent Leonard Cohen one?
I have not. And so, I guess special thanks to Leonard Cohen. Special thanks to Pink Floyd and Dark Side of the Moon. Personally, you throw on the Great Gig in the Sky at the end there, and you can't go wrong.
There you go. That's it. You can't go wrong at all. Yeah. Seth, thank you for taking the time and for your interest. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Oscar. Appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate it myself. All right. Talk to you soon. And there you have Oscar Velasco Schmitz. Good guy, obviously doing a lot on the CCSE. Interesting to talk about a little bit of immigration in this presidential election year. Obviously hot on your mind if it is January of 2016. Here come the Iowa caucuses.